So we start in a few minutes, or at least as soon as Carsten is back to lead the slides. I guess you're back, Carsten?
Yes, I am.
Okay, right on time. We're on the clock. I think we can start. So welcome everybody to the second session of the co-working group for IETF 110. I am Marco Tiloca. My co-chair is Jaime Jimenez, who couldn't make it for this meeting. We have Carsten Bormann as standing chair for IETF 110. So next slide, please. And other than the first point mentioned already, as usual, we assume people have read the documents presented today. We have to try to make good use of this time, especially to solve big issues on the document, and the not well applies. More on that later. The blue sheets is filled automatically, so you don't need to specify your name anywhere. I'll be your Jabber scribe for today, and we have Ricard as note taker. Thank you very much, Ricard, for taking it. I will also try to help with the minutes. Any more help when you can is welcome. Next slide, please. So it's an official IETF meeting, and the not well applies. This is not only about IPR and broadly patent declaration, but also the code of conduct. So be professional and nice with each other. Next slide, please. Right, a bit of practicality. Please use the queue tool on Miteco to enter the queue and to leave the queue using the hand on your top left, and the chairs will admin the queue. Otherwise, you can request to relay your comment or question in the Jabber chat. The meeting has been recorded already, and again, participation blue sheets are filled automatically. So next slide, please. And this is the agenda for today. It's mostly working group documents, open points raised during the Shepherd write-up for one of the core conf documents, next steps to take for the two SNML documents, and then new block, which has passed working group last call, and time link. And then we have two individual submissions on resource directory extension and the new work on data-centric deployment for co-op. We have also quite a bit of flex time, so we don't need to rush. And I think then we can move to the next presentation. The first one, CoreConf, which is Carsten. Yes, can you believe that?
It's not including the other PDFs automatically. So I'm actually used to that. Okay, let's talk about the CoreConf documents. There are 4 CoreConf documents that have passed working group last call, and 2 of them are in IETF last call. Right now, the Yang SIBO and the SID document. So we are waiting for the various reviews and AD opinions. And so far there is one review in, which is by the security directorate about Yang SIBO. And Sean rightly states there are not really security considerations here, and that is all right so. So it's hard to invent security considerations here. I'll talk about SID in a moment. The other 2 documents are Komai and Yang Library. So these are in data tracker status waiting for Shepherd write-up, and that's me. And for Komai, I actually generated some comments, and I believe these actually need to be resolved before we can submit this to the ISG. And with respect to Yang library, I still have to review that, but that will happen very, very soon after the IETF is over. So these two will be the next block we hand over to the ISG, but we wanted to make sure that Yang, CBOR, and SID are done first. So with respect to SID, we got one interesting comment from a security AD. Normally ADs comment when there is time for the ISG to take a ballot position. But this time Ben actually mentioned at the start of the last call that this appears, the core SID document appears to be a proposal to create a registry and assign globally unique UNT64 values to items in unrelated Yang modules. And that is a new global naming system. And yes, indeed, that's the point. And we are very, very interested in hearing the views that the security community has about that. So the security community has been somewhat tied to ASN1 object identifiers for a while, which is a global naming system with rather similar security considerations, I would say, but otherwise some very different properties. And let's see what they find about the SID thing. So here we just have to wait for another week until the last call comments are in. And of course, the ADs can add comments to that later on. Okay, so I'm looking forward to be surprised. Now to the Komai document. There is one issue that actually I didn't notice in my Shepard review, but that independently came up in the NetMod working group. And they didn't notice that it actually applies to Komai, so that's a connection we had to make. In NetMod, there was a discussion about type equivalence. That's really not something that's well defined in Yang right now. For instance, is it a backwards compatible change to go from a uint8 to an int8 or back? And that's actually a discussion item, and it's not yet completed, but it seems to go into the direction to say that essentially the built-in types are the boundaries between the different top-level types, and you cannot switch your built-in type without essentially needing to allocate a new identifier. So it seems to resolve in such a way that we don't have to make a change in Komai. But the question, of course, still is, do we need to rely on it? Right now, there are certain inconsistencies in the draft. Well, not really inconsistencies, but different ways to handle similar things that are not motivated by giving a rationale. And let me explain that. So this is the table that explains how to encode a Yang data type in a URI query parameter. So the encoding of Yang in CBOR is defined in the Yang CBOR document, of course. That doesn't raise this kind of problem. But the URI encoding is separate from that because URIs aren't binary. So we cannot just stuff CBOR encoding in there. And as you can see from the table, when we actually want to do that, we have to use base64. For about half of the types, we use base64. But because we know the type, we actually can apply different encodings to different types. So for instance, Boolean is simply encoded as 0 or 1. There's no need to do a CBOR encoding of the Boolean and then to base64 that, which would be 2 bytes. We have some leeway here, but the question, of course, is it really necessary to encode uint8 and int8 in 2 different ways? So the pink places are the places where we simply use the key and interpret it as an integer and convert this integer into a decimal string and use that in the URI query. It's not quite clear to me why we have to encode negatives or potentially negative numbers in CBOR and can send the positive numbers as they are. So this is a little bit of a mystery. Clearly, if the number is 0 to 9, then into string is more efficient. But that's also true for int8. That's not just true for uint8. The blue thing is something that simply is not defined. I have no idea what that means. And the orange or whatever that other color down there is an interesting special case where the binary value is directly sent into base 64 and not CBOR encoded before that. And finally, a string is just sent as is. And I'm not sure that that's actually possible because not all strings are URL safe. So I think we have to take a long, hard look at this table again. And I'm pretty sorry that I'm really noticing this only now because, of course, changing this table will impact implementations. And we don't really want to mess up the implementation space of this. But I think this is actually worth looking at once more. Any comments on this slide? Okay, then I'll go on. We can discuss things at the end. There are a few more things in the Komai document that are probably worth changing. One is the text about blockwise transfers that really doesn't say anything that is specific to Komai. It just has some general observations about blockwise transfers. And I'm not sure that we have to repeat those general observations in the Komai document. So I think what we need to do here is just mention that there is, as soon as you get into the field of blockwise transfers, there are additional considerations, but we shouldn't try to speculate about potential solutions for that. The other item is related, but it is not about blockwise transfers of Yang CBOR data, but it's about discovery data. And here the text says pagination should be provided for discovery data in well-known core. And that doesn't work because right now we don't have a way to do pagination for well-known core. We have one for the core resource directory, which may need to deal with much larger data sets and therefore needs pagination even more. But we don't have one for well-known core. So first of all, the requirement that is put out here, it's not clear how to actually fulfill that. And then it's a should, and the next question with a should, of course, is always, now, why is this not a must? Or in other words, why didn't we write down what the conditions are in which this should can be violated? And I didn't fail to note that pagination is actually something that is actively being discussed in the netconf, netmod working groups as well, because it's even a problem for Yang. And so it is important if you have a system that somehow has the whole default routing table or something like that, and you want to retrieve that. That's pretty big, so it probably makes sense to divide this into multiple RESTconf transactions, for instance. And there's even a draft that discusses this. I don't know where that draft is right now, but maybe we should not try to solve this here, but wait for the Yang community to come up with a way to do this. So I think these two need to be cut down. I don't think we want to add new material here. I think we just don't want to require things that are not well defined or are essentially impossible. Comments on this slide? Okay, and finally, there are a few nits where I think the conclusion is pretty clear how to solve them, but they still need to be done. So the current text is not clear about leading zeros in the base 64 encoding of numbers, of SID numbers. And one could read it as saying we elide all leading zeros, including the only zero if we encode the SID zero. Nobody probably has thought about that because the SID zero is unlikely to be allocated, but still I think that there's a certain danger here to do something that can be abused in some form. So we should probably just say that 0 is a single A. And don't create ambiguity. And yeah, the rest is just stuff. So I think the plan is to have a new version of Komai with these things addressed, and I think that the technical work is really looking at this again. So I'm not saying we have to change it, but I think we do need to make one more round at it and really be sure we want it to be that way, because creating a non-backward compatible incompatibility between int and uint is asking for trouble, even if the Yang doctors tell you everything is fine. So that's my input. Why does it say 6 of 7? Where's the 7th slide? No? Okay. So, discussion.
First of all, thanks, Carsten, for raising these good points. Just relaying from the chat on your point about pagination and well-known core, both Ivo and Christian agree. And especially if there are broader comments from Ivo as a co-author, please take the mic.
So from my point of view, those are all fair comments. As you said, for the table for encoding, we could consider changing it. From my point of view, that maybe make more sense. For the implementations I know of, that shouldn't be a big problem to change. I would be interested to know if there are any other implementations where people have that already deployed, or somehow that would be really a serious problem.
Thank you, Ivailo. Any more comments on this point? Okay, so I guess that procedurally we can have the write-up on hold and wait for a resubmission addressing these. Right, Carsten?
Yeah, so my only question would be, do we have to do another working class call if we change that table? And as a current ex-chair of this group, I probably don't have to make that decision because I won't be a chair anymore when that decision has to be made. But I'm not entirely sure that I know the answer.
Yeah, I'll open that with Amit too, just to notice there will be the third working group last call if you count the whole cluster of CoreConf. So just by gut right now, I lean for not necessary, but it's something to consider later on. You're right.
Okay.
Okay, if there are no other comments on CoreConf, we can switch to the SNML cluster.
Thank you, and that will be me again. So there are two documents in the SNML cluster. One is the versions document, where we have a -02 that is addressing Jaime's comments. So Jaime did a review, and he asked for more explanation about the bitmapping approach, and that definitely was a good comment. So we added that, added a few references, so it's clear where the 53-bit thing comes from and so on. And we added discussion of advice to the designated expert to target a rate limit of about 2 codes per year. So with 48 allocatable codes, that would give us 24 years to invent another way to extend SNML, and probably that won't be too hard, in particular since we have must understand labels that we can use as well. So that's -02. There's also an implementation. So Ari put an implementation of the bit that we allocated for additional units into his SNML validator. And here's an example where with the bit set, kilometers per hour is accepted, and with the bit cleared, kilometer per hour is identified as invalid because additional units are not to be used unless you set that bit. Yeah, it's not a big surprise to me that it's not particularly hard to implement this, but it's always good to have done it and be sure that there are no surprises. So from my point of view, this is a done deal.
Yeah, we discussed already at the meeting in November that we wanted to have some comments, and we got from Jaime. So the next step is definitely starting a working group plus call on this. And not sure how many substantial comments or requests for requirements would come, because it's a very short and simple document. But of course, everyone is welcome. So we'll start working group plus call on this.
Good. So the other document is the data content format document. That was updated with a few editorial clarifications and a mention of decompression bombs as a security issue in the security considerations. So if you can put a random media type there, you might be able to put in a media type that enables decompression bombs, and then you can attack an implementation by doing that. So that is all done, but the document has a normative reference for the media type, content format draft, and that goes a little bit beyond the limits of this working group, because it essentially tries to make general statements about media types, content types, and so on. And that was on the agenda of the dispatch meeting on Monday, and it looks like we will first need to restate what we want to do, and then it looks like this will turn into a working group, and so this looks like a process that will take a year or something. So my proposal for getting closure on the data content format document is just to remove that normative reference, to copy over the ABNF, which is essentially just ABNF that has been wisely chosen from the various ABNFs we could reference. So we are not inventing new ABNF except for a single new line, and then call it a day.
Personally, I think this is a good thing to do also pragmatically. What does Francesca think of this strategy?
Yeah, that sounds like the most straightforward, but I would like to see more discussion in the dispatch, because that was the output, right? That we need to have more discussion.
Yeah.
And if we can figure it out quickly, I think we should at least try. And then if we can't, then yes, we move forward in this way.
Yeah, but I think I will still prepare the pull request that has this copy over thing in it. And I'm not proposing to abandon the media content type format thing, at least until we find out it will be more effort than it's worth, but we still have to see that. I just want to decouple the trajectories of the two drafts.
Sounds good.
Please, Ari.
Yeah, I think the way forward sounds good. I was wondering, can we do this in parallel, basically?
Yes.
All this and everything. Okay, good. So we don't have to be waiting in stages. Thanks.
Okay, so the next practical step is a pull request, basically.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I hope the note taker put in an action point for me, or it will never happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Karsten. Any more comments or questions, anyone, by the way, on these documents? Sounds like a no.
The notes are under the wrong document, but I think I will find out what is meant, because we are on the data city point already and not. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Karsten. Next is new block for dots. I'm not sure if John or Matt will present. I guess John. John, if you can hear me, you have to take the audio explicitly.
Okay, can you hear me now? Sorry about that.
Yes, John. Hi.
Hi there. Okay, so yeah, just giving an update on the blockwise transfer, and basically the bottom line is we believe we're ready to go to the next stage, but we'll take us through. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so just going to cover changes since we last met as a IETF conference, where we're at with the implementation and what the next steps are. Next slide, please. Okay, so updates post 07. So Christian came back with some more points. We have worked with that, and we've actually now just this morning, UK time published -08 covering the situation here. So the CSM option for TCP, getting rid of extra detail was not necessarily needed, so we've got rid of that. Again, emphasizing the disadvantage within the new block of being able to mix con and non within the same request response. We have to be one or the other. We can't mix and match, otherwise things fall apart with the recovery logic. And some clarity over peers that have different max payloads, the consequences of that, and how they can be possibly synced up, which in effect is out of scope of this document. Next slide, please. So after much debate, we went for Q block 1 and Q block 2. And then, although it is 02 to 07 is quite a lot, it's just really evolved since the last IETF, and thanks primarily to Marco and Christian in terms of feedback and excellent work there, bringing it into a document a much more solid space. So we've added in some additional disadvantages of using this method, in one sense to discourage people to use this as an alternative to the old blocking mechanism. This is kind of specifically for the dots requirement where there are likely to be lossy networks and we cannot handle in those networks confirmable type stuff. But in order to test for Q block, we've mandated that it's you've got to be using confirmable. Otherwise, we just get back reset messages as opposed to 402 bad option, etc. It's very difficult to work out what's going on. The CSM now has dropped. We added in clarification of the mixing of Q-blocks and blocks in terms of inner and outer wrappers within OS Core. You can, within a particular wrapper, inside or outside, you can only have Q-blocks or blocks, but you can't mix and match, but you can within the two wrappers. And we just put in some additional clarity on the use of the M bit in requests in terms of the block M bit. But essentially that means giving me the next payload plus all the ongoing subsequent payloads. It just makes things simpler and more clarity in there. Next slide, please. And so in terms of the 408 response, which basically was saying we are missing these particular blocks, the request tag could be derived from other mechanisms, so we removed that. Within the congestion control, to make sure that things keep flowing if there is suitable network bandwidth, etc. For the Q block 1, when we're sending effectively block 1s out, there's the use of the continue response, so we can continue quickly after sending out max payloads, which is defined as 10 bodies in one go. And then there's a special case Q block 2 request, special case of using the mbit, where the client can say, yeah, I've got all that stuff, give me the next lot, please, rather than hanging around waiting for congestion control of a default of 2 or 4 seconds, depending on what's happening. We've updated the examples. We've updated the security considerations to include OS Core, and we've updated the CBOR RFCs. Any questions on that before I go to the next one? Okay, next slide, please. So implementation status, everything's done based on libcoap, and there's a PR submitted for the Q block work, which is live and running in the test environments that it's being used in. From the URL, you can actually see that particular pull request. We've had it up and running in DOTS environments testing, in lossy networks. It's all behaving as is expected. So it's from an implementation perspective, it is solid. Next slide, please. So we believe that all the things that have been raised, changed, and all the rest of it, we've adequately handled them, considered them, come back with suitable changes, and it's been proven out in the implementation. So, you know, essentially, we're just requesting moving forward with this document. Any comments, questions?
Go ahead, Christian.
With all the changes that have happened, I'm largely happy with that document. It fits within the scope that it sets out to do. There's a few mechanisms in there that I'm not fully enthusiastic about, but for those things it's supposed to do, I think it should work fine, and I'm happy with that. And thanks to both the authors, you've done a lot of work addressing all the comments, and it's become a lot better than I have expected originally. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Christian. It's certainly appreciated all your input, etc. And yeah, I can see a 7959 biz coming out where it will take some of this work and other work to make Blockwise a lot more kind of stable moving forward. It's, you know, we've referred to already, you know, Blockwise is a challenge point in one of the previous presentations by Carsten. So it's, you know, out of this, I think will come extra work for that BIS, but yes, thank you.
Yeah, I concur. Thanks, John. And I think especially the last update clarifies even better the scope you had in mind all the way, I suppose. And I think it's also a good seminal material, at least part of it, for a possible Blockwise BIS work in core. Okay, any more comments, opinion on this? Anyone? If not, then I think the next step is the shepherding. I can be the shepherd. I had that in mind already, considering the reviews I gave before. So I think next week already I can start working on a final review and the write-up. I don't expect to come up with big comments or anything, considering the previous review and the building up on Christian's comment, but I'll go through all the steps.
Okay, well,
thank you again, John, to you, Ahmed.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking it forward. Much appreciated.
Great. So next item on the agenda is DynLink with Bill presenting.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, Bill. Hi.
Okay, just give me a second. I'll just switch my desktops a little bit so I can optimize this. All right, now you should be able to see me as well. Hello.
Hi.
Sure.
We see
Yes.
you well.
Okay,
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Hello, everybody. So I'll give you a quick update on DynLink. And I don't have very many slides. So firstly, before we start, I would like to thank everybody who has been reviewing the documents and giving lots of feedback. And I see that Alan and Michael are also present with us, and they have been, of course, instrumental in shaping the DynLink drafts lately as well. Alan, or at least Michael, has been there since the beginning. Okay, can you please move to the next slide? Right, so DynLink developments, currently it's at version 13. We continue to request for feedback. The Liveware M2M community has been very forthcoming with some modifications and requests for changes, and we have been incorporating that. And also, DynLink was discussed as one of the last interim meetings held last month in core. So I think we'll continue to have these kinds of like interim meetings to progress the draft further. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, the first change is a substantial facelift in the editorial sections. What we did was that we started to accumulate quite a lot of different kinds of attributes, and then it became necessary to be able to logically separate them into two kinds of classes: the notification attributes and the control attributes. So now there are two tables. One of them contains the attributes that are basically conditional notifications, and then the other ones are control attributes that more or less refer to how the server should evaluate certain conditions or perform sampling and so on. Now, among these attributes, the new ones that have been added into draft 13 are the last two from both tables, so the age attribute and the confirmable notification attribute. Before that, we already added the EP-min and EP-max that you see in the table 2. So I just wanted to briefly describe what edge and con do. If you move to the next slide. Okay, now I see it. All right, so age, the conditional notification attribute, is a Boolean value-based attribute, basically to indicate interest for receiving notifications of either the falling edge or the rising edge transition of a Boolean resource state. And it's fairly obvious when the value of age is 0, then you are basically telling the server to notify the client each time the resource state changes from true to false, and conversely, the value of age is 1, then the server notifies the client each time the resource state changes from false to true. So essentially, by setting the age notification attribute, you can substantially reduce the notifications that you obtain if by perhaps reducing it even up to 50%. Okay, the next slide, please. So then comes con. Con is the conditional control attribute. And sorry, what am I saying here? Yeah, it's not conditional, sorry, it's confirmation control attribute, sorry. That's a mistake on my part. So con is used to flag to the server that the client would like to receive notifications, essentially, firstly by saying it's over confirmable transport, but essentially saying that you want to have a confirmable message. So if con is 1, then the query in the query, then the con attribute indicates notifications must be conformable. I took the liberty, Alan, of also including that the value of 0 is, it does not mean that the notification is non-conformable, but then it's basically server dependent. So you can be either conformable or non-conformable. But that leads me to the next question, to the working group, which is in the next slide. The basic thing is that we have band and we have con, and in our current draft, they are defined as parameters that have Boolean type values. So essentially, I mean, in RFC 3986, when you look at query components, it doesn't necessarily specify the query parameters have to be key value. We use a lot of the conditional attributes to have key value pairs, but on the other hand, we have a little bit of a semantic issue where that, for example, band, we said if band is present in the query, then it basically modifies the behavior of GT and LT. And the same thing is with con, which is con is 1, then it's basically a conformable message that you want to receive notifications in. So the question is whether we should harmonize this behavior so that for band and for con, we eliminate these, that they actually have value. So is it enough that we just indicate that there's a band or a con present in the query? So do you have any opinions about that? Michael is on the queue.
Go ahead, Michael.
Here. We have in the past needed to state that the presence of band is equal to saying band equals true, and the absence of band is equal to saying band equals false.
Yeah.
So it would not hurt my feelings if we just made it explicit and always required a name value pair, but there may be other reasons to not do that.
So the obvious question then is that what happens if you send a band on the query and put band to false? Would that modify the behavior of GT and LT then? Carsten.
Yeah, I just checked 7252 because it's been a while since I last looked at that section. And it actually says the query serves to further parameterize the resource. It consists of a sequence of arguments separated by an ampersand character. So the ampersand character is really hard-coded in the way CoAP handles URIs. And then it says an argument is often in the form of a key equals value pair. So that is definitely not hard-coded, and from the point of view of 7252, query parameters without an equals sign are fine. Now, the next question is, what does the parameter actually try to say? So if you have a Boolean parameter that you can set to 0 or 1 or to T and F or whatever, you essentially have three values. One is 0, one is 1, and one is no preference. And with a parameter that doesn't have an equal sign, you only have presence and absence. And given that absence will be used by everybody who doesn't know about that query parameter, it's pretty much equivalent to no preference. So you essentially only can say, I have something I want to say, or you have no preference. And that something I want to say, from my point of view, for instance, fits very well to the con attribute, because that's really an option that the requester may want to set or may not want to set, and not setting it essentially means I don't have a preference. And setting it means the requester does have a preference. So for con, that really works well. I haven't thought about band, but it's probably similar. So I think we actually can do that. Now the next question is, what do the various implementations do?
Exactly. Yes. So that's why we need also Alan's input, because con is used in lightweight end-to-end. So
go ahead.
Sorry, didn't want to jump in prematurely there. So the presence indicates a desired behavior. So if con is present, that means con is inherently 1, which means you want it to be messages for that observation to be set as confirmable. If con is not present, then that is the default, which means that the server is not stating a preference. So that's why we did not want to spend 2 extra bytes, an equals character followed by a 1 character, because it didn't add any value. I would assume band's kind of the same thing, because if it's not present, you're expecting the existing behavior, which means you're treating the GT and LT independently, versus if band is present, then that means you are stating a preference by default, which means you do want it to be treated as band equals 1, which once again, why send 2 extra characters for no value?
yeah, so I would like to respond to that, because we actually have 3 attributes that are specified as Boolean types. The last one is age, and in age there actually is that significant whether it's 0 or 1. For band and con, they are used more as qualifiers. So I would also recommend that we drop the specification that band and con are basically Boolean values. They are just basically attributes with no values. It's just qualifiers.
Michael, you wanted to say something?
I wanted to say
Michael.
that, I wanted to say that I don't think band is the kind of thing where you would want the server to choose, not have a preference. I think you will always have a preference for band, because the behavior is different, and you will get notifications you didn't expect, or you will not get notifications you do expect if band isn't set the way you want it. So I'm not sure I agree about band. It's to me, it's more like Edge. It's very much like Edge. In fact, I have some more comments about Edge, but I can do that in writing later. And con also, in my experience with the implementation, it's useful to specify that you do not want confirmable responses, because what happens in constrained networks is sometimes it works better to not have the extra messages, and the system performs better if you just use non-confirmable messages. So also for con, it seems like I have seen value in being able to set it to false also. I actually see value. I had used non and con as a different build option in the system, or actually a flag in the instance of the resource, or the instance of the resource. And I was actually setting it to non most of the time for better performance, for things like a light dimmer, where you want to report incremental changes in state and things like that. Now, one could argue there are better ways to do that, but maybe not always.
Alan?
So, yeah, Michael, in Lightweight M, what we've done is we created a resource in the device, which covers the default, so that you don't have to send it every observation. So the default generally is non-confirmable, and that way you don't have the extra traffic, and then you only set it to confirmable in those explicit observations that you think are critical in nature. So that's why we kind of wrote it the way we did, is by default, the system does not send a confirmable, because it's things like, the temperature, the current temperature reading, which is, once per minute. Therefore, those are going to be sent non-confirmable. But if you go over a threshold, we want it to be sent confirmable, because that's an alarm. And so we set it up for default for everything's non-confirmable, and then just set confirmable for those things that are important.
Michael is on the line.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. Then that basically what you've done allows me to depend on the non-confirmable behavior if I really want it that way. But that was a system option in lightweight M2M in their spec. It's not clear that that really says that band in our spec could be just a presence or absence thing. It's still kind of, or sorry, con. I'm not sure now, but it still seems like it's useful to depend on it being false. And if there's no way to do that, it might limit the use of it. You know, if the system can only choose and I don't have an option of saying false, that might limit some uses. But there might be better to do it for other reasons.
Right. I mean, it's basically whether you would like to save 2 characters by not putting 0 and 1, and instead of saying a con or not. So that's an implementation issue. So it's good to get some feedback on that. Alan?
Yeah, Michael, I agree, because we've got a default state that gave us some freedom. If you assume no default state, then you want each, God, I hate to use the word idempotent, but you want each independent observation to be able to set the full characteristics of that observation without assuming some default behavior, in which case con equal 1 or con equal 0 makes more sense. So if we do want to do it that way, it makes, it's a better independent configuration. So I would agree with your statements.
Would you see, Alan, and also Michael, would you see that the value of 0, that the server must send notifications in non-confirmable messages?
That would change that behavior, because now there is a stated behavior that the server is expressing without the assumption of a default. So I would go back to, so there, I think Karsten said it, there's really 3 states. The server is expressing that it wants it confirmable, con equal 1. The server is expressing it wants it non-confirmable, con equal 0. Or the server is not expressing a preference, which con does not exist in the observation parameters.
Michael.
Well, so I think I just heard Alan say that he would want 3 states, 3 settings. Say, definitely do it, definitely don't do it, and I don't care, you choose. And I think that I was thinking more like 2 states, like but I guess if you don't care, you're saying that for band, if you don't include the option, I don't know if we'd make it mandatory or not, but if right now, if you didn't include the option, we've been saying that's equal to saying that it's false. I don't know if that's a good rule or not, but
that's what we've been doing. Band basically modifies GT and LT, and that's all it does.
Yeah, so you kind of need to, maybe if you don't say it, it is equal to false, or maybe you have to, maybe it's not an option. But for con, it's something that we've just in general in core, it seems like we have historically said that the system ultimately can choose because of maybe it's only built one way or the other, and you might have to deal with what the system does. But so maybe con is more of a hint, and maybe the other ones aren't. I'm not sure about that. Because of the general behavior for confirmable responses, we've kind of always said that it's, ultimately the system could decide for other reasons that you don't get to control as an application developer. But I'm not sure if that's really the right rule either. I just wanted to throw that in.
Christian is on the queue.
Doing the con as more of a hint sounds like the right thing to do for me, especially considering all those cases when I know some parts of this are not really thought for proxies anyway, but there are so many reasons why there could be a con involved that making this a hard rule sounds excessive to me.
So do you think that because currently in our draft, when con is set to 1, then it's a must that the notification must be sent in a confirmable message?
At least
would you?
the other way around is the harder one, but even that is kind of, I'd phrase more as a recommendation, but I'm more picky about the other way around, that the system couldn't send it as a condole.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. If there's nothing more, then we can...
Just relaying from Jabber that Ari pasted a link to a Lite210-2M table reporting how these parameters are used in OMA. And the link is also in the minutes.
Okay. Christian?
I have one more comment on the state of things here, having now again seen the definitions that are in there for the properties. Do you think it would make sense to, when coming to the later parts where it talks about the different ways in observation a binding can be set up, whether that's via observation or via pushing, to distinguish which of those attributes are usable with all of them and which are only usable with those that are those like push? Because edge, for example, edge for observation doesn't sound too actionable for me, because that's already the latest state of that resource view, so it doesn't change. It doesn't make sense for observation, but it makes a lot of sense for posting, and not so much for putting actually. So that, I think it would help if that were a bit fleshed out.
Yeah, just to comment on that. So that's a case that I have been mulling over also. So what do we do with edge when you set edge together with pmin and pmax? When you send a notification, whether it's actually a notification caused because you have the resources already change states 2 times and then sending a message because of edge, or is it because you have just you're trying to keep the messages going with pmax? So that's something that we need to also work a little bit more to understand.
Yeah, Ari on the chat is also suggesting that we need at least 1 0 because they would be aligned with what Lite210-2M does, and Alan supports that.
Okay. Quick question, Marco. Is this chat also going to be archived in?
Yeah, it's synchronized with the Jabber chat, and these main points will end up in the minutes anyway.
Okay. Okay. Good. All right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Ari. So if there's nothing else, then we can move on. There's only a couple of more slides, which are just basically updates, and these are updates just from the feedback that we received at the last interim meeting. So essentially, because of the fact that we are now trying to also include the fact that pmin can be equals to pmax to indicate that the server should be sending notifications to clients at every n seconds, and the fact that that's actually a constraint that perhaps the server may not be able to fulfill. The implementation consideration section provides text that this is performed as a best effort service from the server. Next slide. So finally, we also, I just want to update the next steps in this. So I'm not entirely certain whether we are actually incorporating any more attributes, but we have been discussing what happens if there are one or more proxies sitting between the client and the server, and what is the impact on the behavior of the conditional notifications. That's still on the to-do list, and we'll try to get that done. I think it would be very good after discussions like today that we should actually include some more examples in the appendices to illustrate the cases better. And then the final thing is that in section 3.3, Michael contributed some code that discusses the server-side processing of conditional attributes. And I think it would be good to be able to maybe perhaps include a state machine there as well to describe, for example, what happens when you actually have epmin and epmax that's being set. That's all there is for DynLink right now. Next slide, if nothing else. Carsten was not in the queue anymore.
Those controls are really weird. Anyway, so you talked entirely about the conditional notification part. There's also the bidding table part. Has there been some recent discussion of that part?
No, not yet. That's the other big question, whether the draft should be split into two parts. One focusing on the conditional notifications, and one focusing on the link itself. And we haven't had much discussion yet on the second part of the draft, where there has been the issues that were describing the attributes for the links. Michael is on there.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this and kind of like looking at different. It occurs to me that the dynamic link concept can be used independently of the observe attributes, and observe attributes are already being used independently of the links. So it seems to make a lot of sense. This has already been split from one draft with 4 interfaces, but now it looks like we probably should split it again. And I think that there were some independent questions, and there really isn't a lot of interaction at all. So to me, it would have very little impact splitting it also.
So when we split the drafts, the link part gets the dynlink name and the other one gets a new name, and all the lightweight M2M documents have to be changed.
Practical considerations.
Just helping. I think that was pretty much the reason why we didn't do the split a couple of years ago. And
Carsten, the name will anyway have to be changed if it's an RFC, right?
Yes, that's true.
Right.
So I think we could be close to getting the parameters as an RFC, and there's probably still maybe more work to be done on the link part. So maybe there is a good impetus to move in that way.
I would support that argument, but Christian is there and Carsten is on the queue. Both, there are 2 people.
Yeah, also supporting this as much as I'd like to kind of hook onto the momentum this document has and get pulled by it with the part that's interesting to me, which is the dynamic links and not so much the attributes. It sounds sane to me to split this, because the other part needs a lot of work and much has gone in there in the last months in the first part. So they are just getting out of sync.
So it looks like the working group is in favor of this document being split into 2 parts.
I think so.
So what we are agreeing is that we are splitting this document. We're creating a new parameters document, whatever its name is. I'm using parameters as a strawman here, and keep the dynlink document with the link stuff in it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Sounds good.
Bill, a question just to recap on the proxy open point, where there is more things still to do. That was mostly related on the possible usage of PMAX. That is not exactly end-to-end friendly, right?
It was not only PMAX. I think there were some others as well. But yes, PMAX was the driving case. Yes.
I think it's good to take that point, especially at one of the next interim meetings.
Yeah. So it again boils down to how we are actually looking at the client-server interactions here. So is it, if you really want to consider these interactions to be end-to-end, or as we talk about hop by hop, and I think as authors and myself, we kind of were looking at the hop by hop approach, but if in fact it is necessary to look at it from the perspective of proxy sitting in the middle of I don't know what you call it, dynlink client, dynlink server, then we'll have to look at what the proxy can do to impact this, the proper behavior of this approach.
Right. Okay, thanks. Any more questions or comments on this document for Bill? No, okay.
Nothing on Jabber too. Okay, good.
Nothing on Jabber either.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Bill. So should be Christian now on resource directory extensions, for which we had a document, and protocol negotiation, for which we have a new document submitted today.
Yeah. So I start with resource directory extension because that's what triggered the transport communication topic in the first place. I've presented this as an interim at last IETF, or one of the other, sorry, never mind. You've seen this slide before. Next slide, please, sorry. That's a bit of a more concise expression of what is in there. RD extensions is about all those things you can do with a resource directory without having to change how the resource directory specification works, which allows us to get this out finally, and doing more things with it. Of all those that are listed here, I'd like to pick out the one that I think is most important, because there are many use cases where people rather go with MQTT, even though they need most of CoAP semantics, but they take MQTT because this way they can have their devices in the network and still get out through their firewall, because they have something something setting out there that gives them this kind of redirection. Next slide, please. And this is something that an RD-based reverse proxy can do. So the thing that I'm describing in the extensions section is that if you specify this additional registration attribute, which is proxy equals on, much bike chatting to be had, but that's for later. Then you ask the resource directory to provide you with a proxying service, provide another name for you that is publicly reachable, because your 2A0 address might be behind a stateful firewall, might not even be on the latest version of the internet protocol, what's or not, and just give you a name that everyone else can use and become a reverse proxy for you. And because your resources are already discovered through the resource directory, that's a good point where the directory can hook in and rewrite the addresses and send things on to you. This is being used a lot in practice, even not by this precise name and this precise agreement, but most of lightweight M2M does precisely that. The endpoints register at the resource directory, and that very connection, be that the UDP 5 tuple that's now known to the stateful firewall, or be that the TCP connection that has been opened, is then used to, in role reversal mode, to send all the requests that come in through the proxy onto the actual server. In lightweight M2M, that's mostly done through a proxy that is caching, that is eagerly caching, that's kind of taking things in, and they're not exposing it as CoAP on the other side, but the mechanism that's described here is already widely deployed, at least in this particular setting. We've used this for a few times also in the hackathon, because if you have your local server running, you don't have to do all those firewall things. You just register your device at a resource directory that has this proxy facility, and then let that do its magic. I see the question from on Jabber. That's a good one, on whether the RD could partner with the proxy. Only in parts, because the endpoint has to contact a particular endpoint out on the open internet at some point and use that to establish the addresses in the first place and to open up that firewall state. The RD could use another proxy as well, but then still the endpoint would have to open up, in a matter of speaking, that connection to that proxy, and would then go from there. So doing this really inside the resource directory seems a practical thing to do. Any questions on how this works, what this does, before I'm going into why this is a bad idea? I take this as an either no or my headphones are broken. So continuing with next slide, please. I don't think it's a completely stupid idea, because then I wouldn't be presenting it. But it has a big downside, that is URI aliasing, which is we now have two URIs, being the one that the resource directory minted and the original IP address based one, that both refer to the same resource. And in the general web, it's good practice to avoid this. Now, conceptually, this could be avoided if all the clients use the resource directory as a proxy only to access the device under its original name and its canonical name that it picks for itself behind the resource directory. Hard part is the clients would have to discover that proxy. And that's a topic we've already had at some point, being in the protocol negotiation, because there we have the same issue that for technical reasons, not for URI design reasons, we have different addresses that are in the server used for the same purpose. So you have a co-op plus TCP : / address / path, and you have the co-op : / address / path, and they all collapsed onto the same resource because the device can't do anything else. Next slide, please. So there was a let's say working group in the working group in T2GRG for some time, until none of us had too much drive or time to continue there, to finish what was started as protocol negotiation originally, and also to do a bit of work on the SMS side. And driven by that resource directory use cases, I've decided to just take this up again and write out something that could be used starting point here, and I think it addresses most of the things we need there. So how it works is that a server can announce via the regular link relations that we use all around that it has a proxy at a particular location, with the precise semantics being everything that is hosted on this host is a resource that is reachable if you go through that proxy. And that solves most of the URI aliasing problem, because then you just send a proxy request through co-op plus TCP, and it's not forwarded as proxying usually is, but it's just taken internally, and that proxy really, I'll call it the self-hosted proxy there, it's just a proxy for this very device, but this allows us to get around all this URI aliasing troubles. There's an additional facility in there that describes that you can also advertise it as a unique proxy, which just means that the proxy is proxying, but it's not looking at the proxy scheme or URI host at all, and it's just a stupid proxy that forwards to one location only, so that you don't have to send those verbose IP address and scheme name in the transport. So there is, in a sense, some URI aliasing in that if you're looking at it from a package sniffer point of view, you see there's a request there and it gives you the same response as the other one. But on the application level, you never get to see all the ugliness of URI aliasing that's lurking at some point in there, as long as we don't send additional data. Next slide, please.
So how you wants to say something?
Oh yeah, Carsten, please.
I just wondered whether this line that you have there with the /res, is that in addition to some resource, or
that's really just one other resource that's being advertised on that server, and to some extent the justification for the example that I stripped when I later shortened the slides. But the point is, you discover this whole thing from co-op h1 example.com, and then you see that there is the resource and there is the proxy that's for the general host. And because resource, and that's what the statement here gives, resource is, by all those implicit rules of 6690, hosted on /, and because / in full being co-op h1 example.com / having this proxy, you can also ask that proxy for a representation of co-op h1 example com res.
But I could also say anchor equals /res.
Yeah, but then this would only apply to this particular resource, because we don't have any statements around that say that anything else is hosted at res. And while being a bit weird to say that it's hosted at res, it would be legal. So this is by employing this indirection through the hosts relation, we can get one statement that applies to everything that's hosted on that server, and avoid yeah. Next slide, please. So next steps from me are just to bring this out into the community, gather feedback. There's probably a lot of tuning, not only in terms of name bike chatting, but also in which direction do the relationships work best, so that you can express them by utilizing all the compression mechanisms that are. And then update the RD extensions to show how that could be used. So I'm not sure that the reverse proxying case that I have now goes away there, because there are probably many applications that really don't care about URI aliasing, and that don't have good names for the devices themselves anyway, and anything that the RD gets them is good enough as a public name. But there are certainly other cases where we do care about URI aliasing, and there that could be used in, say, a proxy with in a proxy option that could distinguish between do I want a reverse proxy, do I want a forward proxy? That's it as far as I'm concerned. Questions, comments?
And just a clarification, the idea would be when extending the extensions for the AD to somehow build also on the new transport indication document.
Yes.
However it develops. Okay. Thanks. Okay, any more input for Christian?
One last thing I should maybe add here is that even though it's a -00, it also outlines the security considerations that are involved here. And fortunately, the HTTP working group has a similar mechanism that we can take a lot from. So it's not as bad as it might sound originally.
Looking forward to version 1.
I'm just seeing that there is a comment from Michael Koster on NAT pointing to URIT, which doesn't resolve to me. Michael, could you just give a bit more pointer or make that into a full question? Otherwise, I'll just look up what URIT is and try to make a good guess. Okay, thank you.
He was about to speak anyway. Please go ahead, Michael.
It was almost like just a joke that we're building a URI translating gateway as opposed to a NAT translating gateway, but never mind.
Fair point. But that's actually what I'm trying to avoid. So
There needs to be an application URIT. If the other thing is a network address translator, then it's an application URI translator.
Which would probably be the reverse proxy case for the RD extension. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Christian. Then we can move on to the last item in the agenda, which is new work presented by Cheng.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Ah, good, thanks. Okay, first of all, many thanks to the chairs for providing this presentation slot. We are looking together with Christian also into information-centered networks for constrained IoT deployments for quite some time now. And recently we discovered that you can draw some intriguing parallels between ICN and co-op deployments. We did share parts of this work with the ICN community back at the IC Energy and also at the ICN conferences. But we think that also the core working group might as well be interested in this, and that's why we have now this 0.0 version draft. So next slide, please. Let's start with what's ICN. Well, it's an alternative networking paradigm that specializes in content delivery, and it provides a very loose coupling between data and content producers. An application that asks for a network, or actually an application like that asks for data will never specify a server endpoint in these cases. And there are two very prominent architectures that implement these kind of ICN paradigms, and that are named data networking and content-centric networking. You can run NDN and CCNX as an overlay on top of IP, but the actual intention is to replace it on the network layer. The key protocol features of these architectures are that they support a name-based and stateful forwarding. They have an on-path content caching, and they have object security on the content level. And more research, well, indicates that ICN systems can be promising candidates for constrained IoT deployments. Next slide, please. So NDN and CCNX can, for certain scenarios and to some extent, increase network resilience and reduce link traversals. Object security provides an end-to-end protection, which is, of course, well known in this group with all the OSCORE efforts. And this protection also applies to cached contents, especially when the contents are like cached for longer periods. Next slide, please. If we look at the technical aspects of NDN CCNX, then we can easily see that there are some parallels to CoAP. First, NDN and CCNX follow a request-response paradigm, which is also true to some extent for CoAP. There is a request message called interest, and there's a response message called data. Next slide, please. All hops on the path create request state for each traversing interest. Responses return on the exact same path following this request state, and at the same time they consume the state when they traverse back the path. And this so-called flow balance is also a very interesting characteristic because it disallows traffic amplifications, which are of course often used in distributed DOS attacks. And each hop also employs a content cache. So when the data returns, then each hop is consulting a caching strategy, and depending on the outcome of the strategy, the data is locally cached on a hop. Next slide, please. So one benefit of the stateful forwarding and caching is that retransmissions can actually originate from any intermediate hop on the path, and any hop within with the correct cache entry can respond to this retransmission. And this effectively reduces the amount of link traversals, of course, and especially networks where you have or networks that experience a lot of packet loss. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And as a last component, NDN CCNX, they employ content object security. Like said before, this group is of course well aware of this kind of technique with all the OSCORE efforts. So we can skip this. Next slide, please. All right. Now we know how NDN and CCNX operate. Down below, you see a reference paper from 2020. And in this paper, our goal was to build a co-op deployment that is actually very similar to an ICN deployment using only standard features, standard co-op features. And in the picture above, you see the standard deployment with an end-to-end connectivity between a client and a server with IPv6 forwarders in between. And because of this end-to-end notion of this deployment, retransmissions have to traverse, of course, the full path to recover a lost message. And if you look at the picture below, then you see, the data-centric deployment. And in this deployment, well, each hop on the path is a co-op proxy. In this deployment in the paper, we used actually forward proxies, but probably it would also work with reverse proxies. Now, the proxies give us hopwise request state and also hopwise caching and hopwise retransmissions. So exactly like it's what CCN and NDN is giving us. And in addition, the forwarding decisions on the proxies are now done by URIs instead of the IP addresses. So again, very similar to what NDN and CCNX are doing. There's also a bonus that we actually that surprised us when we looked at the Wireshark dumps. Between the proxies, we used linked local IPv6 addresses. And in these, these addresses were derived from the 15.4 MAC address. So 6LoWPAN is now able to fully align the IP source and destination addresses. And we saved around 32 bytes using this deployment for each packet between the proxies. Next slide. So most ICN systems also support multi-party communication, mostly using the features request aggregation and response fan out and request fan out and response deduplication. And of course, by using a data-centric deployment, co-op would be able to benefit from the same multi-party communication feature. There is not much research now in this area, but we are working on providing more results and experiments that focuses more on the multi-party communication. Next slide. Next slide brings us to the conclusions and outlook. So the takeaway is that we were able to show in our experimental results that this kind of deployment actually increases the network resilience, reduces latency, and also the link stress. The location independence of content allows for an easy mobility support. We can employ an efficient multi-party communication. And this kind of deployment also proves that co-op is very versatile, since all we used to build this deployment were only standard features. I mean, as future work, we thought of maybe looking at dynamic proxy discovery, which is based on the names. So this was a very quick run through the things we had. I see that Carsten is in the queue and has a question or a comment.
I have a question. So you didn't really talk about interest routing. So how would this work in a network that's mostly looking like a co-op network?
Yeah, if you go back to the slide number, what was it, 8, I think? Then we can see, the below picture there you can see, I mean, this is a co-op deployment in the below picture. And of course, we don't have interest, but we have gets in this case. So this is the co-op version of doing requests. The forwarding is done on the proxy level. So the proxy knows for each incoming get for a specific URI where to forward this message. Of course, we need some form of logic here. This means it could be like a forward information base on the proxy level. What we did in our experiments was, of course, hard coding it, hence the future work item to making this dynamic.
So how could the resource directory actually maybe aid this process?
Yeah, that's at least for the discovery part. We also thought about using the resource directory. I think Christian also had some strong comments regarding this.
I don't think that the resource directory will in itself help here a lot. It's more the discovery. It's more about local discovery of links. So in a, say, when you take the setups we have now and apply this, then the next step you would look into is actually your routing table. So rather than having a next hop, basically for each name on the network, and if you use resolving names, then for each IP subnet, you would have a route to go to, and there might be something better than just sending it out as a GET. In that you know that in that direction there is a proxy, and use that proxy as a next hop on the application level rather than going down to IP all the way. And the best part I could see for a resource directory here would be to serve as something like basically an announcement points for routes in that sense. So of course, if you combine this with the thing that I've just shown, where you indicate in the resource directory that for a particular host there is a particular good next hop proxy, then you could discover this too from the directory.
Okay, so all the usual scaling issues apply, and so how do you get back some hierarchy and so on? But yeah, that looks interesting.
I mean, it's an unconventional way, of course, of using or of deploying CoAP. I think having proxies all the way. I mean, the question is, yeah, you saw we submitted the 0.0 version. Do you still think it's like a good home for this kind of work?
I think it's worth exploring it. At least it's not out of scope altogether.
Yeah, I think adding OSCOR to this picture might be an interesting twist.
Actually, we did add OSCOR to this picture, and this is also we used the cacheable OSCOR draft that Christian has, because as you know, OSCOR is not yet cacheable. And it worked quite good. I mean, we saw like an improvement of success rates in a network that has a lot of losses, and we were able to like recover a lot of messages by having this pulling closer of content for each retransmission.
I suppose there's also a relatively easy to build relation for the multi-party case that you had towards the end, on which there's also work in progress. Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
we have the building blocks for this too.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I also saw the other drafts that somehow like use a proxy to do something like this, and I think, I mean, like I said, a lot of things CoAP already gives us, so it was very easy to build this.
And Ari is also commenting on the chat. This can definitely be brought to the attention of T2TRG.
Yep, that's a good hint.
Thank you very much.
The next question for me is, can we come up with an interesting experiment that broadens the base of this activity?
I mean, there's, of course, this kind of deployment works very well with, I think it's called in this group, safe requests, or like requests that are like idempotent, where the request to a specific name or URI always like results in the same content, which of course then benefits from the cache hits. And I think a use case that is very good for this is, of course, like firmware updates and software deployment and stuff. Maybe we can look into this direction.
Well, we have a whole working group that is interested in firmware updates. Right now, they are looking at security mostly, but there are lots of people in that working group that do firmware updates. So maybe actually that would be a good basis for such a broader experiment. So they are not using OSCOR for end-to-end security. They have their own suit thing for securing the update. But still, I think it's maybe interesting to propose that as an experiment to get the firmware update from the closest place where it is, instead of having to get it from a server all the time.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Are there any more questions regarding like the architecture itself or the choices we had?
Nothing in the chat, but this was a good start, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of course reachable. We are all reachable through the email list. So in case there are more comments, then we can talk to the list.
Thanks a lot, Cenk.
Yes, thank you. Yep.
And we are at the end of the agenda with +1. It's good to have a bit of delay anyway. We have time in case there's any open point to discuss from anyone. Otherwise, we are going to resume with a series of interim meetings starting from the 28th of April, back on Wednesdays. And we are going to have 6 interim meetings before IETF 111. So any other point that anyone wants to raise today?
So can you maybe give an overview, a guess, divination, whatever, what these interims will be about, the next ones that we are going to have?
We don't have an agenda on them yet, but I can imagine discussions on Dynlink, possibly on cacheable score, and on some open points that were opening up the coming days, especially on group combis, I can think about.
Right.
Yeah, but it's mostly a tentative list right now.
Yeah, I think April 28th is far enough out that we should be able to make ourselves a little bit of a program what we want to have prepared by them, so that people just don't drop their pencils and pick them up on April 28th again, but actually know that we will be doing something there, and it's maybe useful to prepare something.
Right.
And we can do that on the mailing list.
Yes. Okay, then. If there's nothing else, then I think we can close the meeting. Thanks, everyone, for attending also this second session, enjoying the little few sessions remained for this IETF meeting, and your weekend. Talk to you soon, also on the list.
And thank you for giving me an opportunity to reminisce being a core chair again for a week. I hope I don't have to do that again.
We'll see.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.